You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. Thanks for joining me today on this glorious Palm Sunday, if you're listening to it on Palm Sunday, or Holy Week, or whenever you're listening to this. Thank you for joining me and my...
Always a pleasure to be here.
The husband.
We both have a little throat thingy going on.
Mine's purely allergies. I saw the yellow pine pollen on our car yesterday, and I knew. Mm-hmm. It's actually not as bad. Thankfully, this is one of the great things about moving to Wisconsin, is the pine pollen that so wrecked me, I should say, every spring is not as apparent in our area now.
Yeah, well,
we'll see.
Very good. Just excuse me if I make some grunting noises throughout the episode. Try and keep it together.
And of course, we have Marin with us as always.
She's got her favorite spoon.
She's got a spoon. She's got a book and an alligator.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Keep her entertained.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
5.5 months old.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
They start small and they get big.
I know.
Children. Amazing.
Okay, so we have a number of topics we wanted to cover. And if you listened to the podcast yesterday, it was a quick fire Q&A with Mary Hazeltine. Well, now it's I don't know if quick fire, but we have a couple topics that we didn't want to necessarily dedicate a full episode to right now, but we do want to talk about. So we're just going to kind of move through whatever. We have like 5 or 6 topics.
Give a sketch. All these topics deserve a full episode. And if they're of interest to people, I suppose we could do that in the future. But
yeah. Okay. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. I know which one I want to start with.
What's that?
Let's start with business.
Oh.
So Pat started his own business when he was, 18?
Yeah, in college, yep.
Yep. So, over a decade later, has not worked for anybody else except for contracting and consulting gigs.
Yep.
So a real entrepreneur and self-employed guy. And I have helped him over the past 8 years. Mm-hmm. And now I'm also not unemployed, self-employed, I guess.
Yeah. You could call yourself. You're not collecting unemployment.
No. I mean, besides.
No, you help me, and you've always helped me. But even before, when you were working with you worked for QVC, you helped me then. But then you left QVC, and now you really just help me. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
home shopping. If anybody does not recognize QVC,
yeah, it'd be
ask
weird.
Your mother, you would.
It'd be weird to call you my employee. I think. Yeah,
I'm technically not.
Yeah,
I'm not, according to the tax purposes anyway. And then I also do freelance editing stuff.
Yeah.
So I know this. If you look at the numbers, millennials especially, it says like a crazy percentage of them intends to start a business of their own at some point. Mm-hmm. And now that people are quarantined and maybe a little uncertain about their employment future, or just have enough time on their hands now to maybe think about that passion project that they wanted to turn into a business at some point, and take the next step into starting your own business. Since Pat is so well versed and has consulted so many others in starting their business, why don't we start there and just talk about some general, especially when if you start a business, whether or not Pat, your business, your main bread and butter comes from the fitness industry.
Yes.
But we do a lot of stuff in the Catholic space as well. So, but even if you are not intending to start, a doll company that only creates stuff for Catholics, mm-hmm. and you're going to be doing something that's going to reach non-Catholics, how you do it in an ethical fashion and
sure.
still retain that Catholicism.
I was talking with somebody about this the other day, and I really like that my business is not in the Catholic space. And not that I think there's anything wrong with having a business in the Catholic space. I think that there's many wonderful people who are doing important and good things, and they deserve all the livelihood they make from that work. The reason I like it is I see a lot of the work, the quote-unquote work I do in the Catholic spaces, as volunteer work and even charity work to an extent, because it takes a lot of time away from my normal business activities. But I'm happy to do it, and I'm very grateful that we have a business that's successful enough that allows me to dedicate that time where I don't have to turn down any projects because somebody doesn't have the resources to hire me to do it. And just where I am right now, I'm very grateful for that. So, people ask me to speak for certain Catholic events, or they ask me to write certain articles on things. I can generally, within time constraints, I can generally say yes without having to make like a hard decision of, sorry, this just won't help me pay the mortgage right now. And I like being able to do that. I like being able to give back like that. Now, I understand that other people, this is their livelihood in the Catholic world, and you have to make economic decisions. So I just want to be very clear. This is not to in any way say that there's something wrong with doing business in the Catholic world. There's only one way to do business wrong, which is unethically. But otherwise, so that's my setup. And I am primarily. People always ask me what I do. It's kind of so weird to explain it. I'm primarily a writer and online marketer. That's really what I am. So I consider myself predominantly a writer who happens to know how to market. That's, I think, kind of how I've always seen myself. And people just started calling me a business owner and entrepreneur, which I guess I am. I have a legitimate company that I've been running for, like you said, over 10 years. And I've never worked for anybody else except for a few menial jobs in high school.
Hut, right?
Yeah, Pizza Hut, where I just really did it because I had a crush on somebody. And then as soon as I got the job, she quit, and then I quit. So it was embarrassing. But that was it. That's my whole career history right there. So people actually don't usually like hearing business advice from me because I think that I'm probably a little bit more pessimistic than a lot of these gurus you find online, because I think a lot of them are full of it. I mean, running a successful business is really, really hard. And when it comes to doing anything that's really hard, you need to have the right expectations. Are you willing to develop the skills and put in the time and make the sacrifices? And you have to be radically honest with yourself. And, not everybody needs to be or even should be a business owner. And I believe that. And there's nothing wrong with having a job or working with somebody else. And for a lot of people, that makes the most amount of sense. And it's also just not nearly as rosy or fantastic as a lot of people think it is.
We're saying this after we just came off like a week of our heads and laptops grinding away, and it was awful.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I just want to be very upfront because people paint fantastic pictures of their life all the time on social media. And look, I am very grateful and I'll talk about the benefits of being a business owner here in a minute. But it is, I mean, as a business owner, like, you have all the skin in the game. There's really like no clear separation for me of when I'm working and when I'm not. Now, I draw boundaries myself and say I'm done with work here, but it's not like I just punch a clock and my mind is completely away from it. There's always concerns and there's always things that we're having to work on and projects. So
I will say it's not just you. Most of my childhood, my dad owned his own business, and I saw the same things that you do at home now. That's what my dad had to do 30 years ago. So it's not like your experience is unique to you. This is just business ownership.
This is business owners who are being honest about being business owners. Now, so tons of work, tons of skin in the game. A lot of stress. I'm not saying these things don't come with a typical career, but it's just important to be aware of this. Now, there's many benefits. One is that if you're good at what you do, you can be quite economically successful. And we're going through a difficult time, but fortunately our business is still doing well, and we were able to put money away and, kind of weather the storm. Now, I think that that's just something people should keep in mind in general. That's the virtue of prudence in life, of making practical good decisions, knowing that rainy days will come. We have great flexibility. I work from wherever I want, predominantly from home, so we can take trips. Now, the ironic thing is I don't like taking trips, so we could go anywhere, but I like to stay at home.
Yeah, you see that, like, you start your own business, you can work from anywhere, and you see, pictures of somebody's feet propped up in the Caribbean Sea in the background, but that is not... And you can live anywhere. Well, we moved from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin.
Yeah, so, and I would say most of the business owners I know that do what I do are pretty similar. I would say a number of them are certainly a little more adventurous than I am. I'm just a homebody. I just like being home. I like having routine. And I think you need that routine. Like, just because you're working for yourself doesn't mean it's just a free-for-all. You will need structure and discipline like anything else. And my day, is, as you know, is very structured, very organized, as organized as my haphazard brain can make it anyways. And when I get out of that structure or routine, productivity goes down. So that's now the nice thing is I'm home with you a lot more, and I get to be with the kids, throughout the day, and we can go places where we want. And I have the freedom, a certain freedom that my business gives me to take on other creative projects as well. And me personally, I love it. Even on top of all the stress.
And when I was still working in an office job at Helping You, I really struggled with, Pat and I could pull something together as far as like a product goes, or create something in a week or two, have it out there and get feedback from people about how much they liked it, or, whatever. And it was so fulfilling. And then I would go and work my typical full-time office job, and I would slog on something for months and present it. And then somebody would be like, oh, we'll revisit this in third quarter or something, like, oh,
Yeah.
And so there's just, it is nice, that benefit of feeling and seeing the good that you're doing almost immediately.
Yes, the creative aspect is a huge part of it, and that's what it's always been for me. I always figured from a pretty young age I would do something creative, either music or writing, and it wound up being writing. And having worked with many big corporations, so for people who aren't entirely aware of my background, my writing includes both traditional published books, so I was a For Dummies author for a while, and I have books with other publishers. And that gives me a taste of the corporate world, because, I have 5 editors and all these people.
Meetings.
And everything is so slow and really frustrating. Whereas when we self-publish stuff, it is, and like there's benefits to having teammates and that, but there's something nice about being able to create something and get it out to the world somewhat promptly and see the value that it provides to people. There's an efficiency in being a small business that's rewarding from a creative standpoint. Absolutely.
And we can also, if an unexpected expense comes up, we can try to turn something around and pay for that, rather than stressing over, is our next paycheck or the paycheck after that going to cover it?
Correct. Yeah, you really kind of do determine your own income once you have a certain set of skills. And that's really what business ownership comes down to. It comes down to skill sets. I talk about this in my book, How to Be Better at Almost Everything, that business itself is a skill fundamentally, or at least a collection of different skills. Now, some of those skills are the skills of understanding how to sell things, how to be persuasive. So you need to study the science and arts of persuasion and copywriting and how to build relationships. And a really great introductory book to that I read when I was young that gave me the right perspective is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I would highly recommend that book. And so that's kind of like the businessy type of skills. But then you need an even more fundamental, I call this skill stack in my book. You need a more fundamental skill that actually can bring value to people's lives. You need a skill that you can sell. And now what is that? Now for me, that was kettlebells and fitness. And being able to provide value to people who are busy but want to get a great workout in, who want to take charge of their health, who are looking for efficiency and minimalism in fitness. And I was able to do that through my expertise in kettlebell programming and making exercises that are effective, efficient, and fun. And through all the years of content marketing I did around that, and then being able to construct certain systems within the online marketing world that allowed me to really turn this into a business. So you need fundamental skills of what it is that brings value to people, because if you don't have anything that brings value to people, you're not going to have anything to sell. And then you need business-specific skills in relationships, skills in persuasion, skills in marketing, copywriting, advertising. And people might be like, well, that seems like a lot. And I guess I would say it is. But I mean, look, you want to get good at a musical instrument. Everybody has the idea, the right expectation, like that's probably going to be a lot of work. Well, you want to build a business is successful. It's going to be a lot of work, and there are no shortcuts to these things. And it actually annoys me all the time online. You see all these ads of all these business owners selling all these stupid, weekend programs of transform yourself into an entrepreneur. And
yeah, just come to my session, my event.
Yeah, and that's just not how it is. That's fantasy world. That's
So besides say grabbing a book or two that your book.
I would really appreciate it. Yeah.
But also, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. What else would you say as far as resources to get somebody going?
Yeah. So the fundamentals, I would say, if you're gonna produce content, you should learn to write well. So I would say a couple books. Get On Writing Well by William Zinsser. Also get The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. Get How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And then in terms of like copywriting and saleswomanship, that's a weird word, and being a good salesperson in general, I would say look to some of the great direct response marketers throughout history. There's one book that was very helpful to me when I was younger. It was called The Ultimate Sales Letter by Dan Kennedy. And Dan Kennedy he's kind of a big fish in a small pond, meaning if you're in the marketing world, you probably know who he is. And that's a perennial book. But before you even get into the specifics of copywriting and advertising, there's also a book called How to Write a Good Advertisement. I would recommend that one as well. I mean, there's a ton. So it's hard to think about where I would exactly start somebody, but there's a decent collection, I think. Mm-hmm.
So you think it's, if you're thinking about starting a business, at least now is take a step back. It isn't going to be buying your website necessarily, your website name, or integrating Shopify. We need to step back and learn skills.
Well, so when I was in my first business mastermind, and do get coaches and mentors too, and this was in college, I was kind of stepping out into the hallway, and one of the guys he was probably like 65 years old. He'd been running his business, I guess his entire life, and he looked like it. And he took me aside. He said, "Pat, do you know what an entrepreneur is?" And I think I probably tried to give him like some technical dumb definition. And he just said, no. An entrepreneur, Pat, is somebody who's willing to work 80 hours for himself every week just so he doesn't have to work 40 hours for someone else. That seemed true to me then, and that still seems true to me now.
Yeah.
So if you have that willingness expectation, then maybe, and you still want to do it, then maybe it is for you.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the balance is that you don't want to like ruin your soul just to make money. But if you want to get good at this, you can expect, at least starting out, that there's going to be significant investment up front. Now, the truth is I do not spend nearly that much time on my business now. I don't.
You used to be.
I used to be. And it was very stressful. But we got momentum. We got to a point where now I have more freedom. But I would just say you have to have those realistic expectations.
And also, as far as what we've learned over time is not to agonize over, don't just stay in the planning prep phase forever of the business. You got to get out and do something too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. There's another book, not to get too many books on the reading list here, but it's called Ready, Fire, Aim. And it talks a lot about that. So much of being a business owner is, and I think that's where I've always had something of an advantage. I've always been that type of person. It's like, all right, let's just go. Let's just start taking action. And I struggle with perfectionism like anybody else, but I think that I've had more of a willingness to just get started, even though I feel like I don't have everything figured out. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of, you learn through the mess.
Yeah, and then also if you're selling it, then you had feedback from customers, and that gives you an idea of like, what if you had this whole idea for a product in your head, and if you had spent 6 months creating it and then putting out this whole finished product, hoping it's waiting till it's perfect, you may find out that half of it doesn't work for people.
Exactly.
So you start putting out piecemeal even and get feedback, then you're better able to what's a jargony word? Jive? I don't know.
Refine, edit, respond, react. The point is, and this is true for all creatives, you have to be willing to learn through the mess. You have to be willing to make a mess, and you have to be willing to get a lot of criticism. You're putting yourself out there, which I know is a topic we'll talk about at the end here. So I don't know if that was helpful at all, but learn some fundamental skills first, mm-hmm. But also don't be hemmed in by perfectionism and fear of starting. Right.
Okay, cool. Where do you want to go next? We could go suffering, voting like a Catholic. What do you want to do?
Voting like a Catholic sounds relevant.
Yeah, we've got our own state, a primary in our states on Tuesday, actually, mm-hmm. and I don't know if if our absentee ballot has come in or not, or if we're just going to go. But either way, voting's coming up soon for a lot of states and a lot of regions. How do you vote like a Catholic?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think it is important to realize, first off, that the Catholic Church is not a political party. And the Catholic Church has always rightfully, especially in our modern, sort of American culture, made that distinction very clear, right? The Catholic Church is not the Republican Party, is not the Democrat Party. And there's good reason for this, right? The Catholic Church is God's church, right? It transcends all political parties. And the Catholic Church has, her perennial teachings, her dogma, and her doctrine, which will not change, whereas political parties can and very often do change. So it would be a gross mistake for, a Catholic to just by default, or Catholicism by default, to just align itself with any political party, because political parties as we have seen throughout the generations, even in our country, can shift quite radically in a number of their views. Yeah, sometimes even swap places. So how to vote like a Catholic really just is it's kind of in some ways it's simple, in other ways it's more difficult, is just to be a Catholic and to be clear on what you believe as a Catholic, what issues are of highest priority. So for Catholics, that's almost always going to be life issues, especially in today's culture, things like abortion and euthanasia. And you might have strong opinions and justified opinions on other things, but Catholics have to believe in proportionality. Right? So let's just take the abortion issue. Like, this is a preeminent life issue. We believe this is a grave moral evil. So whatever your opinions are on, say, taxation. So even as a business owner, I would prefer lower taxes like that. And I think that that's probably prudent for a lot of economic reasons. I'm not against taxation altogether by any means. But however I feel about taxation, even if I feel that one political party had an awesome tax plan and I wanted everything about that tax plan, if they were also pro-abortion, I couldn't vote for them.
Yeah.
I have to put my other preferences aside and say, look, there's a principle of proportionality here where this issue has so much moral significance that whatever I care about in taxation it cannot override the grave evil that's occurring on the life issues front.
Father Spitzer, if you guys ever watch Father Spitzer's Universe on EWTN, he in a recent episode he said very much the same thing. So that life issue without giving the due dignity to each human life up front, that right to life, then all other issues are kind of they're auxiliary.
Well, they absolutely are, and the reason is that other issues, to take healthcare, for example, right? The only reason we care about healthcare is because we believe that there's value to human life and that human lives, because they are valuable, deserve a certain level of care. Well, it makes absolutely no sense to care about healthcare, but then feel that human life is completely dispensable, at least on some level. Healthcare is something that is of instrumental value, like property. Right? We can't even care about property unless we first care about what property attaches to, which is the dignity of human life. So that is a clear marker, I think, for Catholics in today's culture. If it comes down to political candidates and one of them takes a stance that is a positive and in line with Catholic teaching on these preeminent life issues, that should be a guiding factor. And then, if it gets a little bit – so some issues are very clear-cut like that, are very clear-cut. But other issues are not so much. And if there's candidates where it's like, okay, it doesn't seem like there's any grave moral evil being promoted here, then there's actually a good amount of room where Catholics can have intelligent, open debate. Even on things like universal health care, for example. There's not really an upfront moral issue on either side of that debate. So that will really come down to pragmatic considerations. Does this seem tenable? Does it make sense given our current system, the size of our government? But that's something where Catholics in good standing can have reasonable debate. But no Catholic can support a candidate who's pro-abortion, for example.
Yeah.
And so really it comes down to understanding your faith. And this is unsettling to some modern ears, but your religion needs to inform your politics. That's how it needs to be, right? Religion is the most fundamental, and it's kind of a tricky, weaselly, contemporary, liberal political paradigm that would try and separate those two. But you can never and should never separate those two fully.
Yeah, why would you want to separate your morality from your politics?
Right, and people are like, well, we shouldn't.
Those enmeshed.
Yeah, and the people push, well, we shouldn't legislate morality. I mean, you do it all the time. That's exactly what happens, right? When people think that abortion shouldn't be outlawed, they're thinking that it's immoral to outlaw abortion. So no matter what, morality, that's what the legal system does, is it rides what people believe is the moral law.
Stealing.
Yeah.
Hitting and running.
Right. And then
all the time.
And then there's a question of, well, how close should the legal system ride the moral law, right? So like everything that we think is immoral can't be or probably shouldn't be legally outlawed. For example, we would say that lying is immoral. It's always immoral. But it probably doesn't make sense to outlaw all. Like, how would you even enforce that, right?
Yeah.
But there's some issues that are so gravely immoral, like murder, like abortion, that do deserve to be outlawed and have significant penalties and fines attached to them to deter the moral evil that they are. So the whole point of a legal system is not just to create order, but to signal to the general public and promote the common good in a larger moral framework. So no matter what, morality is always going to bear on legality. The only question is, how do we get morality right? And then to what degree should the legal system ride the moral law? Mm-hmm.
So if you're coming up on a primary in your state or even this November with the presidential elections, excuse me, just search online. If you're unsure, you can find what your ballot will look like. And then from there, it's a very simple search people create nice little grids and charts of, if this candidate versus that and who believes in what and their stances on abortion or healthcare or whatever else. So just do your homework. It doesn't take very long.
Right. Good.
Okay. What next? What do you want to tackle next?
What do we have? We had the resurrection. We had suffering. A lot of eclectic topics.
Yeah. Catechizing your kids. What do you feel like you're tackling?
Let's talk about the resurrection. It's appropriate for the season.
That's right. Yep. So this is just evidence for the resurrection.
Yeah.
Somebody's struggling with that.
Yeah. So a number of people, I know you've gotten some messages on this. I hear it a lot is okay, Pat, I follow all the philosophical arguments and evidence for the existence of God, but that doesn't prove Christianity is true. How do we get from the God of the philosopher, right? The God that, comes out of some of these philosophical arguments to Christianity. And the first thing I want to say is that's right. That's very good. There's extra evidence or arguments that are needed to get to Christianity. And in my apologetics project, whether I'm doing it on my own podcast or the books I'm writing or with St. Paul Street Evangelization and the work they've hired me for, is I kind of see for Catholics, there's kind of three main things that we have to argue for and support. One is the existence of God. Two is the resurrection of Christ, that God really did raise Jesus bodily from the dead. That is an actual historical event, because if that happened, that's God's divine endorsement. Like, at least some form of Christianity is true. Mm-hmm. But then to get to Catholicism, we then have to argue that God left us with a church, not a Bible, and that church was from the very beginning the Catholic Church. So those are kind of the three pillars of Catholic apologetics. And, depending on your conversations with people, somebody could be stuck at any one of those. So pertaining to the resurrection, I know we didn't want to turn this into an hour episode, there's a number of approaches that we can take, but one quick one that I think is helpful for people is called the minimal facts approach. And this was made pretty popular by an historian named Gary Habermas and also another professional historian named Mike Licona. And what they do is they argue for a sort of baseline set of minimal facts that have a very strong degree of historical credibility. In fact, the vast majority of historians of all political and religious types agree on these basic facts. And these would be facts such as the fact that Jesus existed. So no serious historian denies that Jesus actually existed. That's you hear that on a popular level, but nobody who is specialized in this field really believes that. So some of the minimal facts would include not just the fact that Jesus existed, but that he was crucified, that he was buried or entombed by this Joseph of Arimathea, that the tomb was discovered empty, and that groups of people, both individuals and groups of people, through various times, locations, and circumstances, had appearances of the resurrected Christ. That would be another fact. And also that the Christian beliefs, the unique Christian beliefs, experienced a rapid origin and spread. Now, what's important to pay attention is that in affirming those kind of minimal facts, historians aren't saying that Christianity is true. They're saying these are the things that we can have a reasonable and responsible basis for believing in. And as historians, they might just leave it at that. But then you got to take the question further and say, okay, well, what explains these facts? What is the best, if we're going to make an inference to the best explanation, and we have these facts need to be explained, right? What makes sense of these facts? Where do we go from there? So just to kind of outline them again, we have crucifixion, we have empty tomb, we have post-mortem appearances, and we have the rapid origin and spread of Christian belief, which, again, in historical context is really amazing. Right? This came out like almost out of nowhere. It's just boom. And so the move you make from there, and I think it's a totally legitimate move, and it's quite convincing when you really look into this, is you see that there's no natural explanation for these facts, and that any natural explanation that has ever been proposed for these facts, whether it's conspiracy theories or hallucinations, they do not have adequate explanatory power, depth, and many of them are actually quite ad hoc. So let's take the most popular natural alternative, which is the hallucination theory. Well, maybe these the people who saw Jesus were all just hallucinating. And there's tons of problems with this. One is that hallucinations are not group experiences. That's a really big one.
That would be a miracle itself.
It would be a miracle. So the fact that these appearances occurred to not just individuals but groups, and not just one time but many times, and not just in one place but many places, it really explodes any possibility of this just being some type of hallucination. Hallucinations are private experiences. And remember, the types of people who had these hallucinations would not have been prone to them. So sometimes the proposal is submitted that Jesus' followers were so grief-stricken. They were so grief-stricken that they just had these hallucinations. And even though that's maybe sometimes the case, that somebody would have a hallucination after being so grief-stricken, it's certainly not the type of thing that is reported for these people to have experienced of Christ, right? They didn't just, experience him like in heaven talking to them. No, physical bodily resurrection. Where did that come from? There was no expectation of this as well.
And he was also appearing to non-believers.
And that's the big second point, right? And two people really stick out there is both James and Paul would have had no reason to have these. Paul was, of course, a homicidal maniac persecuting Christians. So it's hard to find people who seriously entertain this view on a scholarly level anymore, because it just doesn't explain what needs to be explained. Furthermore, it wouldn't have explained the empty tomb. If these people were hallucinating, the first thing you would think would be like, well, look, the guy you think is alive is here, dead. Look at him, right? Mm-hmm. So it totally fails in being able to explain these facts. Conspiracy theory doesn't work because people don't intentionally die for something that is a lie. It would not explain the conversion of skeptics. And there's no incentive. There was no incentive to try and conjure something up, right? What's my big reward? That I get to be persecuted and have my head chopped off? I mean, give me a break. So we could do a full episode on this for people who are more interested later. But the short of it is that the best and perhaps only explanation of these historical facts is the traditional explanation, that God raised Jesus bodily from the dead, that this miracle really did occur because God wanted to sign off on Christianity and the teachings of Christ. So that's the kind of short sketch of.
Yeah, I'd say for a quick-ish, easy read, I always like the Case for Christ, because that helped dispel a lot of the misconceptions I had about this whole thing. And
that is nice, because it actually Strobel, the author of that, really does talk to the relevant experts in that field. So that is a very good introductory book for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
If you want something more substantial, The Resurrection of Jesus The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. He's a professional historian, and also The Resurrection of Jesus by Dr. William Lane Craig. And that'll, if you want to plumb the depths of the historical basis of it, I would highly recommend those two.
Okay. Cool. Maren has a lot to say on this topic. Should we just let her?
Yeah, Maren, why don't you take over?
Okay, so we're coming. Oh, you know what? Let's since it's a season for the resurrection, but it's also the season for the passion. What can we say about the problem of suffering and the problem of pain?
I feel like we talked about this not too long ago.
Oh, it's just something short. Did we?
Yeah.
I did a podcast, like a mini Catechism Friday on it, I think.
There's a really wonderful, so I mean, it is a problem, right? Because we believe that God is all loving and all good, and the world is suffused with suffering. Now, most philosophers admit that there's actually not a logical contradiction there, that God could have morally sufficient reasons for allowing the suffering that happens, which diffuses the logical tension. The problem is there's still a huge emotional impact there. We want to know, like, why does God allow all this suffering? Why does God allow all this evil? And I would say a couple things first, and one is sort of a framing and perspective exercise, I guess, when it comes to suffering. And here's what I would say to just help set the stage is always look in life. There's a good general principle. Always look at what is unclear by using first what is clear. And here's what seems clear to me. I think we have overwhelming evidence and arguments for the existence of an all-good and all-loving God. Specifically from philosophy, we can deduce this. We have scientific evidence from the fine-tuning of the universe, from the beginning of the universe. And of course, we have the revelation, the direct revelation of God, specifically in Christ, which shows that God is not at all indifferent to our suffering, but enters into the depths of God-forsakenness to love us back to himself. So use what is clear, which is a perfect God, and then look at what is unclear, which is suffering. And then you can deduce this, right? If God is perfect and suffering exists, God must have morally sufficient reasons for allowing suffering and evil to exist. And in some sense, you can leave it at that. And I admit that that's not entirely satisfying. It can be intellectually satisfying, but not emotionally satisfying. Intellectually, because it makes sense. Okay, God is perfect, suffering exists, so there must be some reason why it exists, even if I don't understand it. And so this using what is clear to look at what is unclear and still have a reasonable hope and trust. But people often want to go deeper than that. And this is where I think you do have to get out of philosophy, at least somewhat, and enter into the Christian mysteries, enter into the passion of Christ, and specifically look at the biblical narratives and how they answer to the problem of suffering. And I think what you will find is that is something very profound, that God's relationship to creation, not just human creation, but all of creation, is one of parental love, Abba, Father, Papa, and that in many ways, the way we can kind of start to see how suffering could be beneficial is analogous to how we might allow our own children to suffer when we can see some greater good for them that they themselves might be completely oblivious to. A simple example might be a vaccine. They don't understand why they're being poked with a horrendous needle. I remember when I was very young, one of the most traumatic experiences of my life was getting 2 shots into my thighs, and it hurt like I couldn't believe. And I didn't know why my mom was doing this to me. I was crying. I was screaming. I couldn't sleep that night. For some reason, this gave me a lifelong fear of needles, which my wife will attest to. I still have this fear of needles. But my mom, in her responsible loving of me, knew that this was and she didn't like it. So none of this is to say that God likes suffering or that God even wills suffering directly. He allows it to bring about some type of environment that is conducive to love, that is conducive to our initiating acts of love. Eleanor Stump, a great Catholic philosopher and theologian, has a wonderful book called Wandering in Darkness. If you're struggling with the problem of suffering, get Wandering in Darkness. It's only 668 pages. It's not a problem. But just get that book. But if you get that book, skip right to the biblical narratives, especially the book of Job. She does such a beautiful job of doing through story what we can't do through philosophy, which is start to satisfy the emotional pain of suffering, and to see that suffering is not opposed to love, but it's conducive to love. Now, of course, humans have the free will to turn away from suffering. And not just evil, human evil, but even natural suffering is conducive to love when properly understood. And she actually gives a good example of this that's always stuck with me. And she says that, like most of us when she flies on airplanes, she doesn't want to talk to people. She's one of the first people to pull up the newspaper, let it be known that I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to be by myself and do my thing. But as soon as the pilot comes on the intercom and says, "We're going down, this plane is crashing," the first thing she's going to want to do is talk to somebody. She's going to want relationship and human connection. And that's a clue. That's a clue that there's something in those, and I think we can all recognize this, that if God fundamentally, if reality fundamentally is relational, is love, and God intends for us to share in the divine life, which means that we are meant to be creatures of relational love, of self-giving. And we look in our lives at periods of great suffering, and I know this is absolutely true for me, the times when I have been broken down the most in my narcissism, my egoism, my egocentricity, my self-centeredness, my nastiness, have been periods when I have been beaten down the most by suffering. And that has cracked me open and opened me up, or when other people have been beaten down the most by suffering. And so it's this weird, mysterious thing, and we all hate it. But I can certainly not deny it in my life, that it's those periods of the most intense pain when I have been most radically transformed for the better. But only in those times also when I was receptive to it. There's other times when I realized that I became more bitter and resentful, but then God just allowed me to be broken down all the more.
Well, that's that wonderful Fulton Sheen quote, and he's always wonderful with his his insights that, the only way that God can get into some hearts is to break them.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a little, yes, honey. Sometimes it's just a little, crack in the outer shell. Sometimes a complete breakdown of of it to get in.
And this is just a general sketch. This is something that you can plumb the depths of, and I think you should in terms of theodicy and theology and entering in and staying close to the foot of the cross and seeing and realizing that God does not like when we suffer. He really doesn't. And to show that God is not indifferent to our suffering, but from any suffering, from any evil, as Scripture affirms, God can draw greater good from it. And that is in no way to diminish the reality of suffering or evil, to no way to say that God likes or prefers suffering evil, but to show that God is so omnipotent that even when evil or suffering occurs, he can draw the best out of it. And the paradigm example of that is the resurrection. That from what is arguably the most horrific evil of all, literal deicide, the killing of God, God uses that event to redeem us and eternal salvation. Now, if that's possible, if God could take the worst event that we can imagine and draw the ultimate good out of it, then surely he can do that for any other thing in life, even if we don't see what it is at the time.
And even say in periods of suffering, say now we're all quarantined and we are missing our loved ones and our friends and our usual lives, and some of us are suffering economically or physically or emotionally from all of this. We still see even glimmers of it now, right, where people are trying very hard to show their support and love for one another. They're spending more time with their families. They may be praying more. So even in the short term, we can see that there is good being drawn out of a time of suffering and fear. Oh,
absolutely. We're seeing more people drawn to prayer, appreciation, relationship. Now, it's funny because you also see like the best and the worst of humanity in these times. And that goes to show we have a role. We are co-authors of this. God has given us the dignity of being moral free agents. So how we respond matters.
Yes. Yeah. Years ago, I would have... a friend of mine, his dad was dying of cancer, and suddenly, they're going to church and they're speaking kindly to each other. At the time, I was very cynical. I was like, well, they're just doing that because he's going to die. It's not real, But it's a genetic fallacy where it comes from. Well, it doesn't matter where it came from, but God uses these moments to pull us back to him.
Yeah. Again, it's not enough to just say, try and describe the psychological motivations of somebody. And I've certainly known enough people that have died in terrible circumstances and have reached out to God because of that. But I can also say that was 100% authentic.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind that they became, and not just to God, but to everybody else, they became genuinely more loving, genuinely more compassionate. And all those things, whether they survived or died. Yeah,
and would that have happened without those moments? We don't know. But looking at the trajectory of their lives up till that point,
and then think about that, right? Okay, terrible that my one aunt got brain cancer and did die from it, but she grew and broke out into enormous love before she did die, and made incredible reconciliation. And then, if that's what gets her to heaven and eternal bliss with God, that's a win.
Yeah,
that's victory. Right? And we got to remember that it's not just this life, and that God has promised to wipe every tear, and that the glory of eternity will make this seem like an infinitesimal blip on the radar, any sufferings that we have in this life. Again, not to diminish the sufferings in this life. They're terrible, but in light of eternity, we have to keep these perspectives in mind.
Yeah. Well, the kids and I were just learning about St. Therese of Lisieux yesterday, and so I had them do their handwriting exercises was tracing over and copying her wonderful quote. The world is thy ship, not thy home.
Yeah.
All right. So the ship, it could be a cruise ship for some people. It could be kind of a nightmare voyage across the Atlantic, circa 1550 for others. But it's a vessel that gets us to our final destination.
Yeah, and as the Catechism says, that the world is not yet perfected. It's in a state of journeying. So we can't judge the symphony by any one of its parts, right, or the picture. We are in a state toward perfection. Anyway, there's a lot more we could...
I know that's a big topic. Okay, since we just mentioned about what the kids and teaching them about St. Therese yesterday, just a few tips if you are... sitting at home now with your children and you're not able to go to Mass, and you're wondering, if they usually go to the children's liturgy of the Word. What can you do with them to make sure that they're continuing to get catechized? There's so many. I mean, we've done many episodes, and there's so many resources out there. But just a few things to keep in mind that we do in our home. The first thing is just to keep it simple. If you're trying to teach your kids about the Catholic faith, don't overcomplicate it, especially when it comes to liturgical living and how many feast days are on the calendar. I said it's like a fast track to type 2 diabetes in some ways, because there's a dessert for everything, and I love that. But there's a feast day every day of the year. Which ones do you keep? Do you celebrate all 40 days or whatever of the Easter season with chocolate every single day? It's a lot. Activities, coloring sheets, crafts. But I would first say just start simple. Start with the basics. Commit to doing 1 decade of the Rosary every night as a family. Do your nightly prayers with your kids. If they have questions and you're not sure of the answers, keep a running tab on either a notes app on your phone, on a piece of paper that you're not going to lose. And then do some research. Spend 15 minutes at the end of the week, just quick finding something that would be a good Catholic answer to your kids' philosophical or theological questions. I think we've covered a lot of good topics on this podcast, but Catholic Sprouts also has a wonderful, she puts out episodes every single day, quick 5-10 minute episodes every day about really, really good, important truths about our faith, from abortion to the resurrection and everything in between. So, you'll find a lot of answers very easily, and that the Catholic Sprouts, you can just put that on and your kids can listen to that directly. But just start with basic stuff. Don't overcomplicate it, no matter how old your kids are. Nobody outgrows the basics. All right, so talk about, we love the Baltimore Catechism. We go through that, and that's a conversation with our family almost every single night at dinner. Yesterday when I had Mary Hazeltine, her episode went up. She mentioned about raising boys, that a lot of it comes down to having a wonderful father in the home that's really committed to their spiritual and physical upbringing, especially the spiritual upbringing. So make sure that you're living the faith yourself. The kids see us praying many times, and they see us praying with them. They see us taking Mass seriously. And taking the feast days seriously that we do celebrate. So, just pick, some of the few basics to help your kids understand the faith. I would highly recommend a decade of the Rosary a night if you have young children, and then working your way up, especially if you have older kids who can sit still for longer. Just a conversation with the Baltimore Catechism. That's how much was that on Amazon? $5?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can find, I'm sure, the PDF of it probably
for free.
Yeah.
So, that's a super, super easy. And then just living the faith yourself and making sure that, the kids are seeing you try. And also then if they have questions, and kids always do, make a note of it and actually come back and revisit those questions. Like, hey, you asked this question on Monday. Here it is at Sunday dinner. Let's talk about it. I found the good reason, and we're going to listen to this podcast after dinner. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, just don't overcomplicate it. It's doable, even if you don't have the help of, say, your church at the moment may not be doing children's liturgy, or maybe they are. I know some churches are live streaming some lessons and putting that out there. Take advantage of all this. I think it's really wonderful. We've gotten so used to being able to go to church whenever we want, or for some of us, we just don't go even if it is available to us. Now's a great time because it's the materials are being brought into the home. Mm-hmm. So take advantage of all of it. But there is so much, so try not to get overwhelmed by it all. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think that's all great stuff. I know we just did the episode somewhat recently, which we talked about the kind of day-to-day with the kids and our own prayer life. Mm-hmm. So I would just reference back to that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think, is that everything except for the criticism?
That's right.
So end on criticism. I don't know. How do you want to?
Yeah. So a
baby who's getting a little fussy in my arms.
Yeah. So I think it's important, and this is something I've always done in my own business is always look at the good and the bad. What are people saying that's really positive? What are people saying that's negative? And something that people have always asked me, as somebody who's been kind of in the public sphere, in some degree, at least the online sphere for a long time, is, how do you handle criticism? How do you respond to criticism? Because I think this is something that stops a lot of people from kind of starting their own venture or putting themselves out there or venturing opinions. And I guess we'll start general and then get specific. Is it going to happen, right? There's no way that you can put yourself out there. You can take a position on anything, and you're not going to face some type of criticism, and possibly even really nasty criticism. And there's really kind of just two ways you can look at this. One is that the criticism might be merited, and if it is, and you pay attention to it, you can only stand to improve. The other is that the criticism might be unmerited, and therefore you shouldn't pay attention to it, and you shouldn't be upset by it. And that's easy to say, but we're all emotionally involved in all of our projects. So I don't think that there's ever any type of criticism that doesn't agitate you somewhat. Now, I will also say that having been called names on the internet since about the age of 12, I'm pretty emotionally callous to it at this point. I mean, I've just been in it for, whether it's people criticizing my writing, my books, my articles, my YouTube videos, my social media posts, my physique. I've had it all from every angle that you can imagine: political, physical, religious. Some of the nastiest stuff that you could ever imagine has certainly been hurled at me. But I guess part of the reason we bring this up is specific to the Catholic Mama. Is in one way, there's been so many wonderful reviews and sharing, but there's also been some people who've said some kind of not nice things recently.
Very not nice things.
And oddly enough, not necessarily about you, but about me.
Yeah, you seem to have incited the crowds.
Yeah. And so we were looking through some of the reviews, again, overwhelmingly positive, but there was a few where I forget what they even said.
You're arrogant.
That's right. Yeah. So I've heard this one before. And maybe, in some ways, I think it's been, you made this known to me when I guess we first started dating, is I just have this odd personality where I tend to be very divisive, but not purposely. There's just something about the way.
Yes, there is something
about my face, about the way that I speak, that either people find it attractive or they get annoyed by it. And I've thought about this. I said, well, how could I change this without fundamentally changing myself? And I don't think I can. And I really don't. And I think the best that I can do, and the best that anybody can do, is to speak truly. And I guess it's a little agitating in some sense that even among Catholics, when you just say something that should be so obviously true, that they get upset about it. And so, for example, here's a statement. The Catholic faith is the one true religion. The number of Catholics that have been upset by me saying that amazes me. Mm-hmm. And to the point of going and wanting to leave a bad review on either my podcast or your podcast because I say that it's rude or it's arrogant. First off, I don't see how it's arrogant, because if you're saying that that's not true, you're making your own claim. So you're arrogant. The whole arrogance charge just makes no sense. The only thing that we should pay attention to is it true or is it not? Let's pay attention to the matter of what's being said before we start, quibbling about the manner in which it is said. Now, both are important, but it seems to me that the only reason you should be Catholic is because you think it's true. I think that's the only reason you should believe anything, is because you think that it's true and you have good reason for it's true. So to see that somebody would kind of go out of their way to disparage this podcast and especially leave a 1-star review seems incredibly babyish to me. And I guess it annoys me more when people criticize your work than mine, because I'm used to it and you're my wife. So if you want to say something to my wife, you can say it to me, quite frankly, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. But let me just make it clear here that everything that Christine does is for the good of the faith, and because she loves it and she loves you and she loves putting this together. And this is an entirely self-funded project. Putting up podcasts, as anybody knows, is not free. We pay for the hosting, we pay for the equipment, we pay for the editing, and it's just, and we don't ask for anything, and we don't want anything in return, except for if you find this valuable, consider sharing it. Consider leaving a positive review. If you think that we're doing any value at all, please consider supporting it. And if you don't like it, if you have an issue, maybe before going online and leaving a kind of nasty 1-star review, just send an email and let's talk. Let's talk about it.
So I think it's funny. My dad. I come from a letter writing people. My parents are always writing letters to people. My dad was just delighted to share with me the other day that he's on the first name basis with a major food distribution company's president. Mm-hmm. They email each other all the time, apparently. I'm curious what they talk about besides the food products. But it just, that happened. My dad was talking to me about that about the same time that this 1-star review showed up, and a couple other messages that I got that were pretty incoherent and not really up for dialogue. It was just worth, they weren't worth listening to and reading or responding to. They were just pretty mean. And not even just mean. You can be mean. This was just debased, some of the stuff that was coming into my inbox. But, I just, if you leave like a Google review or a Facebook review, things like that, there's options for a dialogue there.
Right.
But on iTunes, I can't respond. I can't, like, now, if the person who left the 1-star review who hates listening to the show is still listening, I can't respond to you personally. We can't have a conversation about this. This is just you lambasting me, but we can't fix anything. And that's what I love about writing letters and notes to people that are coherent, not just weird and a little off-putting, just being honest. But if you're writing a letter to me, then I can respond to you. Then we can have a conversation. Then we might be able to fix things. The problem I'm having with, a 1-star review over something that you personally just don't appreciate is that somebody who is curious about the faith, they might see that and not find another podcast that they might like. Right. And then suddenly they're not, researching Catholicism anymore. And suddenly their soul is on the line. So that's, I don't want to live in an echo chamber, but if there's something negative that you really think that I could respond to or change, send me an email and have a conversation about it rather than just putting something up there that, it's just like, years ago on Twitter, be like, I never got my bags from United Airlines. They're the worst. I'm going to take this to my lawyer, just so that you could get the attention and get something free out of it, or just, pat yourself on the back. That's very arrogant too. So if your claim that my husband's arrogant, and so you give me a bad review, is just as arrogant.
Well, there's just basic, and not to spend too much time on this because it's already probably gotten more attention than it deserves. And again, overwhelmingly the reviews are enormously positive, but it is worth addressing some of these, if only because it's because of people like this on the internet that other people hesitate from starting creative projects because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, it's a reality, and people can be just very, arbitrarily vindictive. But I guess a call to some decent principles of decency. When I go to a business or a restaurant and it's really bad, even if the service is really bad, I'll always leave a good tip because, maybe that somebody's having a good day. And I have like a 2-strike policy. If it happens twice, I'll still leave a good tip, but then I just won't go back. I'm not going to go and lambast them online or anything like that. Or if I have a real big issue, I will try and start some type of dialogue first. And I guess part of that is because as a business owner, I tend to be more sympathetic, and I understand how things can just be off some days and how receptive people can be if you just start a dialogue and conversation rather than trying to leave some permanent stain when there's possibly everybody could be better off if I just take, and look, it's very easy to just release steam and just rail against somebody and feel like you've done some great virtuous act, but that's not the case. And that goes for anything, online, restaurants, whatever. I'm not saying that bad reviews are never merited, but it's also very curious that somebody would leave a nasty review and say, every time I listen to this podcast, it's a disappointment. Well, why are you still listening to it? What keeps bringing you back to this podcast that you can't stand? It's like people who listen to Howard Stern. It's like, I can't stand Howard Stern, but I listen to him every morning. Well, obviously, what's going on here? This is a little weird. Just leave it. Just go find there's a million other podcasts. Go listen to a different podcast, and that can be the end of it.
Or send me an email.
There you go.
And a message. I love when I get them. And I've gotten criticism that I've attended to. I mean, it's small things, don't say kids, say children. Kids are animals. Mm-hmm. Say children, something small like that. But let's have a conversation. That's why I do all this. And it's difficult with a podcast because it is one-sided. I can't see you nodding your heads or, face palming your, at the moment when I say something. So just send me a note if you're ever concerned about anything. Or leave a nice review so that other people will find this podcast and maybe find their way to God or strengthen their relationship with Him. That's the only reason I do this. I got, actually, it's been 2 years since I was baptized. It's been a wonderful 2 years. I'm so excited that I get to continue sharing the faith, and I look forward to this. This is my favorite thing that I do outside of, taking care of my children and loving my husband and just having a wonderful family. This has been a crux of my life now, and I love it. I love doing it. So thank you for listening. even if you don't like me.
Yeah,
Thanks for
seriously.
listening.
And thank you to everybody who has supported the project.
And I get so many nice notes every week from people who really do like it. And I love that too. It's not just the people who enjoy the show, and they reach out and send emails and send notes. That's wonderful. I love that conversation. Please keep doing that. That's what I always wanted when I started this, was to have a dialogue with people, not just me talking to a microphone.
And there is, and just one last point on this, there is a great asymmetry, and even in my own business, you see this. You know, you can get 1,000 great messages, 1,000 great reviews, but then you get that one nasty one, and you focus on it, right? Because humans have a bias towards negativity. We all do, right? And this is why most of the news is negative. We have so the nasty ones can kind of they can grab more of your attention than they certainly deserve. And for anybody out there who has hesitated on starting some type of creative project, or maybe even, you know, evangelization project because you're concerned that you're going to face criticism, I wish you could say that isn't going, but it will happen. But you know, you'll build calluses, you'll get used to it, and continue to focus on all the good feedback you've been getting, all the good reviews. Take into consideration criticism that is valid, and try not to let the unmerited, undeserved criticism bother you too much. But yeah, if you enjoy this podcast, for my dear wife, please consider leaving a positive review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever, and just sharing it with your friends.
Yeah, and if you've already written a review for this podcast, think of another one out there, or a business or something that might be struggling right now with the this economic downturn or whatever, and go and leave a review for them as well. Spread that love. All right, cool. Anything else? I think we just like covered everything.
That's it.
I'm spent. I got nothing else. Finally, the baby's asleep just at the end here. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope that, it's Palm Sunday here. I hope you have a beautiful Holy Week. I'll be back on a couple times this week with new podcast episodes. I hope you enjoyed the bonus ones I put up this week with Bread Baking with Emily Malloy, the Quickfire Q&A with Mary Hazeltine, Sharing Catholic Truths Through Fiction with Brendan Lyons. I hope you enjoyed all those bonus episodes. I really enjoyed doing them. And actually, if you have any recommendations on who I should have on the podcast, any ideas that you want to see, either click on the link in the show notes. There's a little Google form that you can fill out with your questions or topics or guest ideas. Or again, I'm always happy to receive messages either on Instagram at The Catholic Mama or on my website, thecatholicmama.com. So subscribe, leave a glowing review, and I hope you have a very blessed and wonderful Holy Week. Until next time, everyone.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.